Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Juan Carlos Soto. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Deputy Director of the New Haven Prize Center. I would like to extend a special thank you to the Virtus Magnus College Department of Philosophy and Religion for co-hosting this wonderful event with us tonight. But before I begin, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land in which we are hosting this event tonight. The New Haven Prize Center was founded and operates on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantuck Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Puggasset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac peoples. We encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you occupy and the history of the place you're in. You can learn more about Native lands at nativeland.ca, the link that you see on your screen. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jonathan Sosek, Assistant Professor of the, sorry, Jonathan.
It's Sosek, absolutely. Sure, of course.
Assistant Professor of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, who will be moderating our wonderful conversation today. Thank you, Jonathan.
Hello, well, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for being here tonight. My role in what will follow is very simple. I will simply introduce our speakers. Each speaker will offer some brief remarks, and then there will be an open period of Q&A and discussion. And Patrick, maybe at some point, let's see, it says on the screen there, comment from wherever you're watching. So I suppose the comments will show up in the chat here. So I will introduce Megan first as the director of the film, and then I'll introduce our other speakers in alphabetical order by last name. So Megan DeFranza, PhD, is an endosex Christian woman and director of the film. She is the author of the book Sex Difference in Christian Theology, Male, Female, and Intersex in the Image of God, as well as other publications on sex, gender, sexuality, and religion. Combining interviews from the film with her own theological research, she recently co-produced a video curriculum for churches entitled Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, Scripture and the New Science of Gender, and that's available for purchase on Vimeo, I believe. Very good. So, next is Marissa Adams. Marissa is an intersex woman, activist, and board member at the organization Intersex and Faith. Her story is featured in the film. Marissa is a graduate of Towson University and was involved with the youth program at Interact, Advocates for Intersex Youth, from 2013 to 2021. She's also the communications and support coordinator at Interconnect and a team member with the Fed Up Collective, a group of trans plus and intersex individuals with a mission to make visible the high incidence of eating disorders affecting trans, intersex, and gender diverse people. So Marissa, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Arlene Baratz, MD, is a physician and mother of 2 intersex women. For the past 20 years, she has supported and advocated for the intersex community. She is coordinator of medical and research affairs for the AISDSD support group and chair of the medical and research policy committee for Interact. Arlene has shared her expertise with Human Rights Watch, the National Institutes of Health, the California Legislature, the American Medical Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. She has co-authored many publications on topics ranging from parenting, ethics, and nomenclature to clinical issues such as psychosocial support, gonad management, and fertility prevention. So Arlene, welcome. And our final speaker is Anunnaki Ray Marquez. Anunnaki is an intersex man, activist, speaker, and seminarian. His story is featured in the film. Anunnaki created restitution for himself by achieving Colorado's first intersex birth certificate in September 2018. This led to his TEDx talk, Born Intersex, We Are Human. He now speaks regularly across the country, including twice at the national conferences of the group PFLAG, and administers numerous support groups online. Welcome, Anunnaki, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
So I think the plan is for me to disappear, and we'll move through the remarks in whatever way our speakers would like to order that. And then as folks have questions, please post them in the chat, and then I will present those questions to our panelists.
Thank you so much for having us. Appreciate all of the work in front of you and behind the scenes from our hosts at Albertus Magnus College and at the New Haven Pride Center. My name's Megan DeFranza, as you were told, and I directed the film. I grew up in white evangelicalism in a church where women couldn't pass the offering plate. So my research, my path began from trying to figure out how I could serve God as a devout Christian woman without accidentally sinning because I was born into a female body. So my journey into intersex was really trying to find my own calling in that way. And then I discovered a whole community of people, my siblings in Christ and, around the world, whose questions about gender and whose oppression in the church was so much greater than mine as a white woman. I did my doctoral work at Marquette University, which is a Jesuit university in Wisconsin, which was fabulous. And that research you can find in the Sex Difference in Christian Theology, a deep engagement with both evangelical Christian theology and Roman Catholic theologies of the body. So if those are the things you're into, that's where you can find more on that. Thanks for having us.
I'll go next. I am really pleased to be here. I honestly have felt since 2015, when I do believe I met Megan around 2016, everything started to go full circle, that I needed to go, I needed to fulfill my calling with getting my Master's of Divinity. It is just, I can't explain, after surviving everything that you just saw and coming so close to death so many times with suicidal ideation, being a cutter, the eating disorders, the things that often happen to us, it dawned on me that I needed to fulfill this calling, because as a wounded person, I kept on, how do I put it, attracting all these wounded people. And how can I help if I'm bleeding all over the place? So I had to actively be in recovery, and then to arrive in a way that could educate me, because obviously, I don't know what I'm doing yet. I'm finishing my first year at Meadville Lombard on a scholarship, and I am just so honored that they've been able to give me that scholarship. As a disabled person, there's no way I could have arrived any other way. And I'm just very honored to be able to speak here tonight and for you to hear our voices, because these are voices that are often silenced. We often hear about the LGBTQ people. Thankfully, transgender people are being heard more and more. The intersex community often feels that the I stands for invisible. And thanks to New Haven Pride Center, that's not the case no more. And I really thank you.
Well, hello, I'm Marissa. You heard some of my story in the film. I've been kind of connected and involved with the intersex community for almost 10 years on various capacities. I met Megan at one of the AIS DSD, now Interconnect conferences in 2016. I was raised in kind of a pretty religious conservative kind of upbringing. So I was really fascinated to understand Megan's work, and really was honored to participate in the film. And I'm just really passionate about this topic, and happy and glad to answer any questions anyone will have. Thanks.
Hi, Arlene. I'm not in the film. The clinicians who did participate in the film are friends of mine. I originally joined Interconnect many years ago to get support for raising my daughters, who were adolescents at the time. And since that time, just hearing the stories and experiences, I just felt called to be more involved. And so I work with people in the community, and I try to build bridges with the medical community. And it's really been a privilege to be able to work with Megan and this group of people who have created this wonderful film. Thank you.
Okay, how are we going to start the questions? I'm kind of lost here.
Well, I'm back as the person with the answers, I guess. I mean, I have a question to start us off. I mean, and I want to begin, of course, by encouraging everyone watching to put your questions in the chat, because I have a couple that I'm personally interested in, but this is meant to be an open conversation. In the film, I know there's a description, Anunnaki, of your conversation with the gentleman. I think it was in Jacksonville, and the kind of, it sounded like transformative encounter that turned out to be. I understand that yourself, Anunnaki, and Megan, and maybe others, Marissa and Arlene, have often spoken with groups in connection with this film. If that's right, have there been other moments of really transformative encounters of that kind, or moments when you felt that people in attendance, scales kind of fell from their eyes, that they were able to recognize the seriousness of this subject?
I'll go first. Thankfully, I am affiliated with the Unitarian Universalist Church, and I've spoken twice now in that type of setting. And then, of course, arriving at Meadville Lombard, which is a UU type theology school.
Mm-hmm.
I am constantly shocking people with what most of us have never even heard about. I'm even up until 2014, I wasn't even using the word intersex to describe my body. I was a disorder, I was a syndrome, all the things that pathologized me. So it's really been important to me as a somebody that's getting their master's of divinity to keep on arriving in these religious type spaces, because we literally have been erased from curriculum. We're not spoken about, and if we are spoken about, we're called disorders or birth defects, and people are truly not getting the right information because the science books themselves are so outdated.
It's a great question. We have screened this film and spoken in many different contexts, from very progressive, non-religious places, very conservative, Christian right. The hardest challenge for us is getting in the door to get people to watch the film. But once they do, so many people are just shocked and cut to the heart. Really, I mean, my relatives are far right, conservative, white evangelicals. And what I know about conservative Christians is they do want to do the right thing. But so often they feel this tension between what they've been taught the Bible says and faithfulness to the Bible and tradition, and then what their heart is calling them to do in loving people. And as a theologian and a religion scholar, I would speak at different events and present things. But it wasn't until I started speaking with Leanne that I realized the power of stories. And you heard her story in the film. Very sadly, we lost her last year. She passed away of a stroke. She was always with us on these events. We miss her so much. But that's when I learned the power of stories to really open people's hearts. And when your hearts are open, then you feel free to ask questions that you might not have felt free to ask beforehand. So I have never been run out of town or, burned at the stake or anything like that, even though I've been in some contexts where I thought, ooh, this is going to be a tough crowd. But once they hear personal stories, once we hear the humanity and the pain that we are implicated in, I think a lot of people then are asking, what can we do? How can we help? How can we make a difference? So we've been very grateful for those kinds of responses.
Well, we do have a couple of questions from the audience. So, Marissa and Arlene, I certainly don't want to forestall any remarks you want to make, but let's get to the audience. I'm so excited. Wonderful. So our first question is from Bria Brown King, who writes, for people who might want to get involved with faith-based communities, is there a good resource for learning about the different denominations and where they currently stand in terms of LGBTQIA issues?
Thanks, Bria. So glad you're here. That's a really great question, and I'm struggling to draw to mind which churches, but there have been some movements. I think it's Church Clarity. If you want to Google Church Clarity, they are pushing for churches to really make their identities known. Like, where do you stand on these issues? Are you welcoming in name only, or like truly welcoming? So Church Clarity is a good resource there. There are a number. The Q Christian Fellowship is a pretty big support network for queer Christians. So that's another place where you can go to find community if you're looking for that as well. So I may think of some others along the way, but I would start with those.
And we can always loop back for sure. Another question has come in from Tina Benigno, whom I know to be on the faculty at Albertus Magnus College, one of the co-sponsors tonight. So thank you all, Tina writes, for sharing your stories. Marissa, I was wondering if you could talk about whether you see any connection between intersex experiences and eating disorders and what that looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. It's certainly a very important topic to me. I do think there's a connection from my experience anyway. Eating disorders often is like correlated with like certain traumas, and I developed an eating disorder at a young age, long before I even really knew the whole truth about my intersex body and my medical history. And so I don't think I understood the reasons behind developing it and kind of using it as a coping skill long ago. But as I've grown older and found out the truth about myself and my intersex body and my history, I have kind of put the two together, that I believe at least a big part of my eating disorder was a response to like not being able to control my body as a child and not really having a lot of say in my own life, and also just kind of being raised as someone who had something wrong with them, with the doctors and scars, etc., all that stuff. And so I think when I was 13, it was just like, well, you know what, I'm going to do something to control my life, to make myself like myself. And it really turned into a big spiral. Yeah, so I've really kind of tied those two pieces together. And then as far as kind of what I do these days, I work in intersex support and advocacy, and I'm also connected with the group that was mentioned in my bio, Fighting Eating Disorders in Underrepresented Populations. I really did for a long time think I was maybe the only intersex person in the world with an eating disorder, and I'm not. And there is an organization dedicated to that work specifically, and so I've really been lucky to find them as well. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Marissa. We don't have another question, but I do. Arlene, I'm wondering, reading your bio here just now and last night, I mean, Human Rights Watch, National Institutes of Health, California Legislature, American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, and that's something in the film I felt like there weren't a lot of kind of big institutions. And I mean, there were hospitals, there were doctors, certainly there were families, there were intersex persons. What has been your experience working on the level of those bigger institutions? How has been what's their receptivity been, if not to the film specifically, but to these issues?
It's interesting. We do a lot of education of physicians and other clinicians, and there's still a strong tendency in the medical community to want to change these children's bodies irreversibly. And the thought is, and these are physicians who very much care about children and families, but their thought is that it's going to be really difficult for someone to go through life having a body that's different in that way. And the idea is to forestall future psychological problems by doing this kind of surgery. And there's no research to show that there are actually psychological problems if people don't have surgery. Part of the problem is that so many people have surgery that there aren't that many people to study who didn't have it. And so with the medical organizations, they do listen and they do acknowledge that there are issues here, but it's very slow for things to change. Experience with other entities such as Human Rights Watch, I mean, right away, they just signed on and have been a huge help to us. There are different legislatures who've tried to pass legislation saying that this kind of surgery should not be done on children who are not old enough to consent. But, you know, there are some very big controversies, and there are some parents, and again, sometimes it does stem from religious beliefs, I think, who think that their children should not be different in this way. And so over the last 20 years, I would say that things have changed a lot, but it's been very, very slow.
Arlene, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your perspective on that. We have a couple of more questions here. First is from Patrick with the New Haven Pride Center, who writes, "I'm so thankful for programs like these because they make me a better human and a better advocate for our community. I'm so thankful for you all. Are there things that those of us in leadership positions in the LGBTQIA plus community can do to ensure that the I doesn't mean invisible?" And that stood out to me. I think Anunnaki, was it you who commented on that? That's so. I don't know, whomever would like to address that.
I'll go first. Whenever I have taught at PFLAG, I've always made it very clear that there's quite a responsibility with adding the I, because as you now can see, it has to do with children, babies, pregnancy, things that LGBTQ typically doesn't deal with. Now, transgender does involve children. So to responsibly add the I often suggest the United Nations Intersex Fact Sheet. It's a 2-page PDF that could be easily copied and handed out, to always remember organizations that are intersex safe, meaning the language is proper. That would be Interact, Interconnect, and then of course Intersex and Faith. And there's a few others, but those are the main thing. I think the most important thing to remember is there is a difference in language, and that United Nations Intersex Fact Sheet will teach that.
Thank you so much. We have, the questions are pouring in. Now look at that. You see, we waited and now here they are. So Kimberly Zieselman writes the following. "Hi, everyone. I continue to love this film so much and think it's one of the best for general awareness raising in such a beautiful way. The end of the film interviews 2 physicians who had 2 different major pediatric clinics, and they do say many of the right things. But years later, these surgeries are still happening at both of those institutions, albeit they're probably 2 of the better clinics right now. Do other people on the panel find that frustrating?" I'm going to go on a limb and anticipate the answer is yes, but I don't know who might like to speak to that in more detail.
Well, I actually think that Dr. Van Leeuwen, Kathleen Van Leeuwen, I think she is not doing these operations, which I find really gratifying. And I think at Colorado Children's, they've really, it's sometimes hard to get a really straight answer on these things, but I think that they have, I think they're doing few of these operations. These two places in particular have really evolved. There's a clinic in Boston Children's Hospital is not doing these operations. It's happening gradually. The problem is sometimes that there's an ethical dilemma when parents really, really want the surgery and the clinic does not want to do it, but the parents say that they're going to go somewhere else. And the people in the clinic feel that if they do go somewhere else, the surgery that the child gets is going to be really terrible. I think sometimes operations happen for that reason, but I think they are trying very hard to limit as much as they can.
Arlene, thank you. A question from Meadows and Minefields. Thank you all for being vulnerable and speaking candidly. My question is for anyone who feels moved. Are there any particular ways in which you have found joy in your own identities or communities? Found joy.
I finally have been able to heal enough where I can find joy. Tiger DeVore was actually one of the first to tell me that I could say I have intersex traits. Now I just simply say I'm an intersex person, but I was actually floored because even the congenital adrenal hyperplasia organizations, they don't call this intersex. I am very proud to arrive as a person with lots of intersectionality with trans men. If it wasn't for transgender men, I truly wouldn't be existing right now. It was due to those brave people. And I am one of the few that is actually, I'm going to go ahead and bring back the word hermaphrodite because it is part of that diagnosis that was changed to my birth certificate. Q56.0 is hermaphroditism. And I'm not a true hermaphrodite. I only have ovaries. It's very rare. And that's why with some people it is a slur. It's not appropriate. And so we need to be very careful using that word because it's very offensive to some. But for me, that's what's going to happen if I show up at the emergency room. It's easier for me to say my sex is intersex and I have hermaphrodite traits than to have them confuse me as a trans man or even a male. I am a man, but I'm not male. So I have lots of pride in that now. I'm very I feel what Tiger DeVore said in the documentary. It's a privilege now for me to be able to help others and to give the right language and to allow such an injured community to find that same pride.
Anunnaki, thank you. There are a couple of other questions, but I want to make sure anyone else who might like to speak about joy as it's a edifying topic.
Well, I get a lot of it from just connecting with other intersex people in the community. I have the privilege of having a role at Interconnect where I get to meet, at least virtually, like new families of intersex children and sometimes hear about the children. And it just is like the happiest thing to me. I think they're adorable. And if there's to know that I'm doing something to possibly better their future is maybe the single most important thing of this for me. So.
Yeah, I would say for me that when my daughters were diagnosed in 1990, that it was really kind of a huge tragedy, and finding support was very helpful to me. And having the long view over more than 20 years, just seeing how people change and grow, meeting someone like Marissa and watching her become the beautiful young person that she is, that brings a lot of joy to my life. And, you know, I'm retired now, but I was a breast radiologist. I did mammography and breast imaging, and I really loved it. But this is really a passion for me because I feel like I have the ability to make a difference in a big way in people's lives. And, you know, just seeing people transformed by getting support and finding other people is really spectacular.
Arlene, thank you. To move on to another question, Coughholic456 writes, I have friends who attend church. How can I best inform them about intersex people? I know homophobic thinking is common, especially in more conservative communities.
That is so true. And that is why we made this film, to help everyone learn. But especially, it was not an accident that we chose people who are intersex from conservative Christian denominations, Catholic, Baptist, Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and Missouri Synod Lutheran, as well as our conservative Jewish friend. So I think you can direct people to the Intersex and Faith website, where they can learn things from us. If you're a member of a church community, you could host a screening of this movie in your community. We tried to create this for that purpose. And then when people want to know more, we did break the film up into 6 different episodes, where I get into the scripture passages that trip people up and the scripture passages that are helpful and church history. And, you know, Augustine, who says, of course we know about intersex people. Of course he uses the language of hermaphrodite, but to learn that there are intersex people in the Bible, in where Jesus talks about intersex people in Matthew 19, chapter 12, just to say, Jesus talked about intersex people, like that blows people's minds. And then to say, you know, someone like St. Augustine, who's a big theologian in the church, says, oh yeah, of course, every culture has people that they don't know how to classify as male or female. Like, for him, it was just, this is in his City of God, which is, you know, widely read, even though it's an ancient text. But here he's saying, we all know this, but now we don't all know this. Like in the church, we've really lost our connection to our history, lost the connection to intersex people in the Bible, in church history. And so that was one of the things I did in my book, is recover that history and trace it really from the early church until today, to try and bring that back. But this is a great place to start. And then the curriculum that we created, which you can find on our website, intersexandfaith.org/curriculum, was built especially for churches and Christians who have questions about, well, then what about Genesis? And what about, you know, these other things?
Thank you, Megan. We have a question from Sarah Haveron, who writes, I found being intersex has presented different issues in different periods of my life. It is my belief that DSD has to be accepted as an option beyond the binary. What do the panelists think? And whomever answers, if you could also explain for everyone listening what DSD stands for.
DSD typically stands in, with the medical community, it's disorder of sex development. With interconnect and interact, it's differences of sex development. And my simple answer is it's self-determination. It's up to that person. If they want to declare themselves as having a DSD or being DSD, or however they want to word that, it's up to them. And I think that self-determination is so very important. Not everybody's going to want an intersex birth certificate. They're going to want just male or female. And that's why my birth certificate should never be a state or federal mandate. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I find I have a lot of success talking to people about intersex, and not always using that language, which can be confusing for people who don't know. One way of talking about it is to refer to these differences as variations of sex development, variations of sex traits. And I think when you do that, it breaks it out of the binary and makes people aware that all of these traits, like everything else about us, exist on a spectrum, and you can exist on that spectrum. You don't have to be fit and shoehorned into a binary by doing interventions that the person may or may not be happy about later on.
It's also true that many intersex variations have some health-related concerns associated with them. So CAH, which Anunnaki has and has talked about, there are some hormonal things there. There's salt wasting, there's cortisol he has to worry about, so those are some true health concerns where you do need the medical community involved. What we're trying to say is that the matter of biological sex and gender identity are not medical concerns. They shouldn't be addressed by the medical community. We're very interested in getting help when there's consent and there are medical needs. And like Anunnaki said, it's about self-determination and how you understand your own body and your own story. So we want to support that, and also be careful. We're not trying to medicalize gender, even though there are some medical concerns that go along with some kinds of intersex variations.
Thank you, everybody. We have another question from Bria Brown King, who writes, I struggle talking about intersex issues with my religious grandmother because while she can somewhat accept me being intersex, because in her words, God created me this way, she can't accept my trans family members in the same way. Any advice?
I think I would ask her the question, is it because of homophobia or transphobia? I'm not sure how that could be worded with this grandmother, but about 50% roughly, according to Intersex Human Rights Australia, according to their demographics, it's around 47% of intersex people will identify as LGBTQ or non-binary, something like that. There is no demographic right now in the United States, but from my own experience, it's about 50-50. So you're going to have your intersex people that live heterosexual, that could be very conservative, that agree with their birth assignment. And then there's going to be people like me. I am probably one of the most queer out there. I have gay intersectionality, transgender intersectionality, queer intersectionality, and then I have these intersex traits. So to find out what's going on behind that, is it a homophobia or something like that? And then guide her to maybe PFLAG or one of those organizations if it is a phobia, because they can help with that.
Could you say a word about PFLAG, Anunnaki? Because I know you spoke at their conference, national conference, at least twice.
PFLAG is an organization that was developed just for parents of children that were originally just gay or lesbian, and then bisexual came in, and then they added transgender, and now they've added queer. And thankfully, they keep on inviting us intersex educators in to help with that, because they now know that 50% of us intersex kids are going to come out as LGBTQ or non-binary. So our parents need a place to go. So PFLAG thankfully has opened up that space so that when a parent of an intersex queer child or LGBTQ child, they can go to a PFLAG now and it's like, intersex, what's that? They actually now know. And since some of us are going to be a part of that rainbow, it's imperative that LGBTQ organizations know what to do with us. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just if I could tack on
Of
to that
course.
a little bit. I think part of the challenge is we are still on the early understanding of the sciences of sex difference and the science of gender identity, and helping people understand that we are learning about this. One of the men in the film, Donovan Ackley, was a theology professor at a well-known Christian institution on the West Coast. And when he came out as trans, he was fired from his job. When he found out he was intersex many years later, he was never offered his job back, even though many Christians will say, well, intersex, you're born that way, and trans people choose it. But there's so much we don't know. Testing, especially genetic testing, can be very difficult and expensive for people to get. But there's to be open-minded that, it may be that soon many more trans people who are being called crazy or who are being, persecuted as making choices rather than being honest about their own experience will in some ways come under the intersex umbrella as we understand more about the science of gender identity formation. But this is a work in progress. But my concern is that as Christians, speaking as a Christian, we can't wait for science to tell us how to love people. We do need to remember that Christians have a terrible history. Humans have a terrible history of treatment for people who have traits that are not as common as the majority. I mean, my father-in-law went to parochial Catholic school. He was hit by the nuns on his left hand every time he picked up a pencil to force him to use the right hand, because the left in Latin is from sinistra, which is sinister. And there are many cultures that see the left hand as a bad omen. And so we have to remember this history that now we see left-handedness as a benign diversity, a variation. But that wasn't all that long ago that we were looking at left-handed people as, being twisted, not as God made them to be. So being aware of our own history and being open to learning more as we do learn more with science is really important. So reminding people of those things may help them be open. We have Donovan's story on the Intersex and Faith YouTube channel. It's called Infinite and Unbounded Love, or I think it's Infinite and Unbounded Grace, actually. And so we can find that link and share it with you as well. It's a 30-minute version of his own story. So we're trying to make those stories available, which I think do help with these kinds of questions.
Megan, thank you. A few more from Kimberly Zieselman. And this is a question I've had too. How can we get this film into wider distribution? What is the current status? The film deserves and needs to be viewed widely. It can do so much good. So I guess this is a question for Megan. I'm not sure, who would like to.
When you figure it out, let me know. I mean, this is the challenge. I mean, I was an academic. I didn't know anything about filmmaking until I started working with Leanne and said, people need to hear your story. And then, providentially, I met Marissa and Anunnaki reached out to me, and this film just kind of, it came together. But this is not my primary career. I'm like learning as I go. So our challenge has always been, how do we get the word out? How do we find more opportunities to screen it? So if you have connections in the media world, we would love to connect with you. You can help us out there.
So Kimberly, let us know.
But I want to thank Kimberly because she's in the film, and
oh yes,
we could not have made this film without her. She's in some ways the narrator, explaining so much behind the scenes as well as on screen. So thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you. And if there are any Netflix executives in the audience, you know who to contact. intersexandfaith.org, I think it is, right? So a question from Kristen Lozada for Megan. I'm sorry, for Megan. When directing the film, what were your first steps to make this film come to fruition? What were your preconceptions when beginning the documentary? So that seems to segue rather nicely from your response just now. So you're coming out of higher education, academic research, and you're moving into the space of making a film. That must have been a very intimate. Speaking as an academic, I wouldn't know where to begin.
I didn't know where to begin either, but I was teaching at an evangelical institution here in New England, and I was shown the door because of my work, because of my theological positions. And so in many ways, that was very painful for me. It was difficult to get a job in places where my resume made sense, but it was because I lost my job and because I was so passionate about working with Leanne that I'm like, what we need is a movie. And I think it was this summer that Caitlyn Jenner came out on the cover of Vanity Fair. And I heard so many of my friends from seminary and Bible college who are pastors just saying all these ignorant and terrible things on social media. And so I wrote this blog post called Transgender 101 for Conservative Christians. And I put up a mini documentary called Voices of Witness Out of the Box. And it's personal stories from 6 transgender Christians. And I said, if you're a conservative Christian and you're new to this conversation, probably Vanity Fair is not the place to start. How about we start over here? And that's when I realized we need that too. We need that for intersex Christians and people of faith to tell their stories. And so that's where it began. But I didn't know what I was doing. I got connected to a local filmmaker here. I live north of Boston, who is a Christian. And I said, I have no money. I need to make a documentary. What's your advice? And once he started to understand what was at stake, the human rights abuses, as well as a better understanding of gender and sex differences globally for everyone, because he's an endosex, typically biological male. He said, we're going to make it. We're going to make the film and we're going to figure it out as we go. And so it was very much like crowdfunding to try and cover our expenses. It's just been a passion project that we've done, even though there wasn't money to do it. So it was a lot of learning as we go. But Paul Van Ness, who is the director of cinematography, I got connected with somebody who does know documentaries. And he was the one who said, what we need to focus on is stories, rather than all the explaining that you do, Megan, as a theologian is great. But in film, we need to do stories. And we were very purposeful about trying to not have me be in the film as an endosex woman ally. So we really tried to let the voices of intersex people lead the whole movie in that way. So I learned a lot as we went. I hope that addresses the question.
Sure. And Megan, does some of that theological, because I know in your book, Sex Difference in Christian Theology, that was 2015, I think, right? And this was 2018, the film? So it was a few
We
years
finished it in 2018. We started filming with Marissa. She was our very first shoot in December of 2016.
First in the film too, I think, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to, I think there are just a couple more here, perhaps. Patrick, I guess Patrick will tell us when we're done. I don't know. I just asked the question. From Eric Capital, he writes, Eric writes, hello, and thank you for sharing your stories. Just curious what you all think needs to happen in our society for us all to feel hope, faith, and love in our everyday lives. So, I mean, I feel like this is a question about, I mean, in my opening remarks tonight, I quoted Elizabeth Johnson. I was really quoting Megan DeFranza on Elizabeth Johnson because that's where I came across that beautiful passage in your book, Megan. But, the vision here is of a community in indifference, right? And of a view of diversity, not as an obstacle to community, but rather as a creative source of that community. So that's something that I hear in Eric's question. I mean, how do we achieve that on a broader scale?
I believe that if we could realize a common humanity, that we're all interconnected, and that there is so much human diversity that has been erased by the government and the medical complex. As we begin to heal, the medical complex is evolving, the government is evolving, and to just always remember that common humanity, no matter who we are, LGBTQIA, non-binary, intersex, straight, no matter who we are. I mean, it's hard. It's like you saw in the documentary. It's hard once a hater hears you, it's hard for them to hate. And I will never stop doing this work, because it transforms people when they see that common humanity.
Anunnaki, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm going to interrupt. We are getting to our end minutes, and I know at least 2 people have a hard stop. So I wanted to just come in from the technical room where I am literally behind the scenes making things happen, to just say thank you and give everyone one last moment to say if they have anything to say. I did share all the resources for folks that were posting, but yeah, just wanted to do that before we wrap up.
Very good. Well, I mean, I introduced us in the order Megan, and I believe it was Marissa and Arlene and Anunnaki. Maybe we could follow that same order. Closing statements have to be quite so formal as that.
Maybe we could do it the opposite way.
Oh, there we go. Isn't that fun? You see?
I'm just to that last question. You know, it's a hard time right now. There's so much going on right in this moment. There's so much homophobia, and right now it's transphobia. And as allies, I think we have a really big responsibility to stand with marginalized people. It cost me my job, but that risk compared to the risk that non-binary and transgender folk experience every single day, it's, there's cost, but there's not any kind of cost when you compare it to how hard it is to live your reality in the world. And so I would just call each of you and allies to just say, please, make your voices heard, speak in your community, bring education to your community, because we have an uphill battle, I think, that we're fighting right now. But we have to keep doing it. We have to keep that vision of a diverse, loving, peaceful community in our minds as we, do the hard work every day of showing up. And I want to thank all of you for showing up tonight. So you're already doing that. So please keep doing what you're doing. Please keep the conversations going. We can only do this if we do this together. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone's interest in the film and learning about us and Intersex, and for all the great questions. Really obviously passionate about this, and the resources that were put up on the screen are great. And if anyone hosting wants to get any of the audience in touch with me, if they ever have any questions, I'm happy to do that. So whatever works, I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants to. So thank you so much.
Yes, if people have questions about medical issues or parents, please get in touch. And, I can't add anything to what people said. Just when it comes up, tell people what you know and try to encourage people to be loving.
My last thoughts would be, again, to remember our common humanity. And since I do have so much intersectionality with LGBTQ, all that, I'm getting all that collateral damage of all that hate. There is no such thing as intersex privilege. And if you are transgender, to be mindful that you could have intersex traits, like many of us have discovered. And I am available to help any transgender person that is questioning if they have intersex traits or not. I'm kind of the gate opener instead of the gatekeeper. It's like, oh, I can't tell you. I've lost count of how many transgender women actually are XXY. It's there without a shadow of a doubt. There are a lot of transgender people that aren't even being checked. And I love helping. That's one of my passions. Thank you.
Well, I want to take this opportunity, if I may, as well, to thank all of you. I'll go in reverse order: Anunnaki, Arlene, Marissa, and Megan for this really enjoyable conversation. I want to thank everybody who put questions in the chat and kept us really engaged with this important issue. It's been a pleasure learning about this issue, seeing the documentary as I've done a couple of times, and I'm glad that our Department of Philosophy and Religion could sponsor it, along with the New Haven Pride Center and Albertus's Pride Club.
And I just want to echo that. Thank you all for your just speaking your truths and being you every day, and giving opportunity to us here in New Haven as a community to experience this with you. And a special shout out to Anunnaki, because you after we had you last Intersex Awareness Day speak for us with us, and bringing this film to our attention to be able to screen it. It's our privilege, and I look forward to many more opportunities for all of us to collaborate together again.
Indeed.
That'll be great. Thank you all for hosting.
My love to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.